Today I want to talk to you about othering. Othering is not about liking or disliking someone. Othering is about the conscious or unconscious assumption that somehow someone from one group is less valuable than from the favored group. Othering has the opportunity to affect your health, your wellness, and eventually your life trajectory. I was born addicted to heroin. Before federal funding poured into communities and called it an epidemic. Before police and fire and even mall security guards carried Narcan as part of their safety equipment. My grandmother, hair disheveled and eyes bloodshot, carried me into Nationwide Children's Hospital. She was scared to death. After hours of nonstop crying and shivering, she couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. After a series of tests, someone came out and told her that I would not be welcome to go back with my family. She was devastated. My mom was heartbroken, and my dad really couldn't do anything to help as an addict behind bars. So from as far back as I can remember, as a wobbly-legged, big-headed toddler, I lived with and was eventually adopted by a white family. Now, more than 15 years in working with young people, I have learned that parents are often the first to affirm a child's existence. They are the ones that will show a child their value. But what happens when those parents, or the ones closest to you in your circle, don't see you as being part of us, but instead see you as being part of them, and therefore have less value? You see, when people make judgments about other people based on stereotypes such as the majority or the minority, gay or straight, rich or poor, first world, third world, of my race, ethnicity, or tribe, they create a virus-like problem. Because stereotypes are an empathy blocker. And when you have a block and you look at somebody as other than me, you have the tendency to not treat them with the same respect. Othering has a cost that we cannot afford. We cannot afford to move our community from we the people to me the people. We cannot afford to build more walls in between people. Instead, we need to be concerned with building more connections. When people other people, they put them in a space where they can be invisible or separate, but almost always as expendable. See, I remember being in classrooms where I would raise my hand, and I would be invisible and not called on by teachers. I remember when I would walk into public spaces with my family, and all heads would turn, but no one would speak. And sometimes I would look at my parents for understanding, but they couldn't understand. Why should they? Because they lived in belonging, the majority, where I lived in other. I remember one day specifically where I came home from track practice. It was a hot summer day. My calves were still burning. My clothes were sticking to me. And I was standing in a very familiar pose, maybe some of you seen from your children. You know that one where their eyes are glassed over and the refrigerator door is standing open? Well, I was trying to figure out if I still had enough energy to actually make myself some Tang, or if I was just going to pour it in my hand and lick it off with my own saliva. But I was brought out of my stupor when I remember hearing my mom scream, "Hey, what are those niggers doing in my yard?" I was frozen. Why did my mom choose to use that word? I mean, this was my mom, the one who held me between her knees when she wanted to brush my hair into a tight bun, the one who adjusted my tutu at my dance recital, the one who put me in saddle shoes and would sometimes lick her thumb before wiping something off of my face. And then she looked me right in my eyes and she said, "What? I wasn't talking to you." You know, I remember sometime my mom having these disparaging conversations about black people, often referring to them as them. I remember she even wanted me to separate myself from my black friends, laughing at derogatory racial comments and jokes, sometimes even looking at me as if I should be in agreement. You know, at that moment, I know my mom did not see me as one of us. But I also know that she didn't see me as one of them. You know, there were times that I wanted to say something, but I didn't want people to think that I wasn't grateful for my adoption. Because after all, the world looked at them as heroes, and they looked at me as the one that was being saved. I went to a predominantly white school. You guys know them, the ones that get the good test scores, but administration really doesn't care how the students treat each other. Well, I had a friend. His name was David. David was a husky little blonde boy. A lot of kids made fun of David in school, but not me. Because sometimes David's dad and my dad would take us on fishing trips on the weekends. David was walking down the hallway once with a group of kids, and he called me a racial slur. Well, the kids thought it was funny. Well, they thought it was funny until I beat the brakes off of David. But I got sent home from elementary school that day suspended. And what would normally happen in a situation like that is that a young person would go home to parents that look like them and would receive some type of love or support. When I went home, I got some lecture about sticks and stones and passive understanding. You know, that day, those kids might have seen the darkness of my skin, but all I saw was the darkness in their hearts. You know, when people other, they tend to look at someone, but they don't see them at all. And when you don't see someone, sometimes you feel like they don't have as much value, and you can misuse them. When you see someone as not having as much value, sometimes you tend to put them in a box and even feel like you can hurt them. You know, othering isn't waiting around the corner, waiting to jump out and say, "Hey, watch out now." Othering is in our families. Othering is in our child's playground. It's in our churches and it's in our mosques. Othering is in the mirror, and it's waiting for us to call it out and deal with it. Othering is an inside-outside job. Sometimes eliminating othering is uncomfortable. But you know what? The bravest and the boldest of all of us are eliminating othering, just like a daily practice, like prayer and meditation and yoga. Othering creates a starkly uneven playing field. sometimes masking systems, and instead asking people to pick apart the differences in other people. Othering can adjust someone's moral compass. Othering led to a second oldest brother creeping into my bedroom and sexually assaulting me. Othering led to a mother turning her head and deciding that it was much easier to put me in a narrative of a video vixen in a rap video than to understand her son taking away my innocence. You see, right now, we live in a culture perpetuated by fear. It's on our social media news feeds, it's in the media, it's being tweeted from a White House by a man who's demonizing the differences in others. You see, people that lived together as neighbors for years now are hearing these things and somehow feel like there's a threat amongst them and their way of life. You know, as an African American woman, I have always understood that I live in the space of other. Because after all, in America, white is the norm. But you know, I've always been okay with that. The books that I read when I was growing up in high school, the movies, the ads, heck, even the flesh-colored Band-Aids didn't resemble my flesh. You know, understanding someone's own cultural identity is necessary in order for them to understand where they fit in this space. Very early on, I was not interested with fitting in. I was very used to walking in spaces and being the only. I was never interested in fitting in. But you know what? I was interested in belonging in a space. Because belonging does not require us to change or conform who we are. Belonging requires us to be who we are. You know, we may all have different experiences. We all have different stories. Some of us came in on different ships. But you know what? We are all in the same boat together now. All of our fates are linked. And together, we have the power to eliminate other. Today, I stand in front of you on this TEDx stage as W.K. Wilson, none other than. Thank you.